I forgot what album we were looking at. Floodland.
What?
God, that's stupid. Let me do it again. Three, two, see, Sam. I'm a mess. All right, three, two, one. Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight's a special episode. Tonight we are going goth. We are going to look at Sisters of Mercy's 1987 album, Floodland. I want to welcome Samantha Evans, Todd Evans, and Reed Little here tonight, so let's get started. Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight we're looking at Sisters of Mercy and the album Floodland from 1987. And tonight we kind of have a special guest in our panel. We have Sam Evans here tonight. Sam, welcome. This is the first time she's been on the show. Everyone, we've seen Todd many times, but now we have Todd's wife, Sam, and she's a Sisters of Mercy fan, I would say. Would you consider yourself a fan, Sam?
Yeah, for those of us who were in the goth scene back in the late 80s and early 90s, this is one of those bands that you heard at a club and it just rocked your world. And so it has been on really high rotation for me when I was in college as a DJ, and just on high rotation anywhere. I went through tapes, I went through CDs. Now it's in digital. So, but yeah.
Oh God, this is going to be good. Well, anyway, Sam, welcome. Glad to have you tonight. Todd Evans, nice to have you back, my friend. Nice to see you.
Here.
Reed Little is back again. Reed, how
Always
are you?
happy
Nice
to be
see
here.
you. This is going to be a great discussion. Let me just go on by saying that it was weird because when I was in college when this album that came out, okay, but it was totally off my radar. I hadn't really listened to it. The only time, Sam, I'd ever heard anything is when we were driving in your car that one night when we were going out for dinner. That is the first time I really ever heard anything. So prepping for this show was really like the first time I really had dived into the Sisters of Mercy. So I'm kind of a newbie. So, but
welcome on board.
Okay, thank you. But if anyone's not familiar with Sisters of Mercy, they were an English rock band that was formed 1980 in Leeds. They had a commercial breakthrough in the mid 80s, and they stopped producing recorded albums, I learned, in protest against their record company, WEA. The last album they ever put out was in 1990, and they still tour today. I don't know, Sam, you may know this. Do they still tour the States, or do
They are coming back. Actually, they're going to tour this year for the first time in a really long time.
Very good. All right.
So there's a bunch of elder goths that are and metalheads that are freaking out about revisiting our youth. So
all right. Well, there's nothing wrong about that. So they put out 3 albums, First and Last and Always from 1985, Floodland and there you go, Todd. Thank you. Floodland.
These are Sam's CDs.
Floodland in 1987 and Vision Thing in 1990. The other thing that I've learned is that most of these albums were all recorded with different lineups. Yeah. But the only mainstay is Andrew Eldritch and his drum machine, Dr. Avalanche, however you want to say
Avalanche.
Avalanche.
Dr. Avalanche, yeah.
But anyway, so we could go through all the records, but we're primarily looking at Floodland. And this was basically Eldritch. Eldritch is just basically just him, isn't it? From what I understood.
Pretty much, yeah.
You could probably look at this as it's almost just like a solo album to some degree, but it was always his baby all the time anyway. So, but before this album came out, the whole band pretty much quit. So it was just him and the drum machine.
And lots of women in the choir because of Jim Steinman. So
yeah,
lots of extra people.
We're going to get to that. But when I was listening to it, I really enjoyed that track because I thought that choir, and that whole Gothic type of
it's huge, it's robust, huge. Deep, rich sound.
Yeah. But I don't know, let's start going around and talking about it. I think I'm going to start off with Sam. Sam, why don't you go into a little bit about how you came to like this band and, your history and everything. I'm just so fascinated by this.
So
Seriously.
I think there was for my friends when I was in high school, I graduated high school in 88, but my friends were a few years older. So
Mhm.
my friends were 84, 85 graduate age range. So they were in all the college indie rock stuff, and new wave and goth was coming to me through them. You couldn't find it on the radio in Atlanta. You had to know somebody at a music store, a record store
Mhm.
to find it. So but my introduction really, if you go back, there's a Mick Mercer, Mick is in like Mick Jagger. Mick Mercer wrote a series of books called Gothic Rock, the Gothic Rock Bible, and he did a collection of music collections. So people will look back on those things as kind of how these groups emerged and came to be. But I had a lot of friends overseas that were online messagings and pen pals telling us about these great records we needed to go find.
Mhm.
But I think the first time I heard them play was at a club, probably in 1988 or 89, and the dance floor was emptied, and this Corrosion came on with just the orchestra and the sound, and everyone looked around and was like, what is this? It was dark and rich, and then the chorus came, and so it was this brilliant dark song about this corrosion, which we can talk more about what that means later, but it was so danceable and powerful. And compared to the new wave, new romantic music in other clubs, it was a wholly different flavor of things. And so from there, I went back and then again forward for Vision afterwards. But Floodland became really an archetype, kind of a, people held it as this time in our lives. There are songs you can go through, Dominion and Mother Russia and this Corrosion, and I promise even the not really deeply entrenched goth folk will know those three songs and can earmark and benchmark times in your lives, events and activities that happen that are tied to that soundtrack as part of what you did, not just in the dance club, but they were really powerful, especially given Mother Russia and Dominion coming out with what was happening at the end of the Cold War and things. So they were really powerful songs, and they were beautiful if you liked kind of dark rock.
Mm-hmm. So when you heard it, just kind of like the water parted, the skies opened up.
It was, I mean, I can
one
so
of those
distinctly
moments.
remember that feeling and that night and that club. And I think Mick Mercer and other people have written about, other people had that same experience the first time you heard it. You were in a club, you were out with your friends, you're dressed up, you had on all your best, regalia, and this song came on, and everyone came in little trickles until the whole dance floor was flowing. And it was just, it's like a seminal moment in my youth. I remember it very strongly. And I know lots of other people that had the same experience. So you're going to find a lot of people, if they were in the dance clubs back then, that's how they learned about Sisters of Mercy.
But Floodland was your gateway drug, so to speak.
It was.
Okay.
It was,
but
absolutely.
It's just, yeah, those moments, you'll never forget that moment where, it's like everything changed when you heard it. You know what I mean?
And we were going out to dinner, and Grant was in the car with us, and I was like, oh, and I turned it all the way.
You were into it. I'll give you that. Well, that's kind of how this show started. Well, that'd be great to do a show on this. That's what we did. But do you like all their three albums, or is Floodland for you the record? Or
I like Floodland and Vision as my top two. I'll go back to First, Last, and Always, but it doesn't have the same impact for me as the later two did.
What what aspects of Sisters of Mercy, I mean, what really hits home for you? I mean, are there certain songs that really connect with you? I mean, let's look at this like this. This came out in 87. How do you think this do you still feel it's just as powerful today as when you heard it back then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that's tied to a lot of experiential recall for me, because it's been at every festival. It's been at every goth rock thing. It's, when I visit my friends in the UK, when we would go to Whitby to the goth festival, it's on a regular play with Faith in the Muse and other things. It is still going to be, even in our folks that listen to more on the metal side of things, it's going to be an always on set of series of at least 3 songs off that album.
Well, you mentioned the metal thing. Are there a lot of people that are into metal like Sisters of Mercy? Because I can't really imagine that from what I heard.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Metal people love Sisters of Mercy. That's my experience.
Well, what do you
Yeah,
think, Reed? Because you're a
older
metal guy.
Yeah, older metal people do. I don't think that the kids are into Gothic rock as much these days, but if you're talking about people who grew up with metal in the 80s, there was a real crossover in the late 80s, early 90s. If you were not a hair metal guy, you were looking for other forms of heavy music. And what there was industrial and goth. So there's a lot of crossover between heavy metal, industrial, and goth. Or if you're KMFDM, you get all three of them. So there's a lot of bands that have elements of those three things into them. Oh my gosh, 9 Inch Nails has a lot of Gothic elements.
I can hear that. I can really hear that.
The image is very universal. Actually, there's a deep pun in there. So when you think of the image of Gothic rock actually comes from horror movies, back to the Universal horror movies of the 1930s. Although what they are more directly taken from are the Hammer horror movies of the 1950s and 60s. These were referred to as Gothic horror, set in some indistinct period of some indistinct location in what they used to jokingly refer to as Middle Europe. And if you look at Gothic bands, they're wearing costumes that could have been right out of Horror of Dracula or Curse of Frankenstein. Although, as we talked about with the Doors were the first band ever referred to in print as Gothic music, mostly because of Jim's vocals and lyrics. But for me, the proto-goth band that I never hear referred to is Black Sabbath. If you listen to that first Black Sabbath album, which again, Black Sabbath is named after a movie, the movie being Black Sabbath. So you have all of these movie horror elements brought in.
That Todd Evans is all over it.
That cover could be, American
It's
Gothic.
very Gothic. And if you think about it, I think Black Sabbath is a good example. Think about it. They call that metal, but it's pretty heavy and it's very it's kind of prototypical goth to some degree. No one really mentions that.
It is. I think it's too many narratives, right? You can't be the godfathers of heavy metal and the godfathers of doom and the godfathers of goth. It's too much.
It's a lot to take on.
They ignore that. Plus, most of the most of goth as it came to be known is a direct derivative of post-punk. Yeah. And post-punks wanted nothing to do with the old wave of heavy metal. They weren't into Zeppelin and Sabbath and Deep Purple. Man, Deep Purple had some songs that could have been in the goth experience. Well, Uriah Heep. Actually, all of those early metal bands could have been goth ancestors. But they didn't have those early Gothic elements, which were bass line is in your face. It has the tribal drumming and then too much reverb. And all of those things were, post-punk hallmarks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And well, I think Eldritch probably grimaced at people calling him goth at the time, because I think he wanted to think he was more of a metal industrial sound magician.
So it's funny, as I was making my notes for this show, the most commonly repeated phrase is "screw Andrew Eldritch." He constantly harps about how he wasn't a goth band and they were a rock band, just like the Rolling Stones. And I'm like, you know what, dude? No one held a gun to your head and made you change your stage name to Andrew freaking Eldritch, or wear all black, or
big
never go
black
out in
hair
the
and white makeup, and yeah.
I mean, the guy looks like the Joker under black light. He is pasty, and he's always wearing mirror aviator shades. Probably because his pupils are this big around. I mean, they're as goth as it's just like when Robert Smith says the Cure aren't goth. Yeah, Bob, you were. Maybe not constantly.
Not constantly, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still don't hear much of it. Well, I don't know. Those other two albums, are those more, I know they got less guitar oriented on Floodland, but the next album, the following album, is it more metal? I didn't
Vision
hear any
thing?
metal elements at all.
No,
for
it's
me.
not
Well-
really. I think the one that's the most metal is Floodland.
Yeah.
I think First and Last and Always sounds like Mission UK. I think it sounds like that same kind of I guess that would be slightly gothic post-punk, I guess. And then Vision Thing actually sounds a little bit like First and Last and Always does, but it's got a song on it called More that's produced by Jim Steinman and has the choir in it.
Does
So
that's
it sort of
the
has
song
elements
that
of
probably
both.
should go to Floodland.
Yeah.
I think of a Vision Thing as Motorhead meets The Cure. It's
Yeah.
much more aggressive. It's much more distorted guitar. There's much less keyboard to it. There's a lot more backing vocals, not the big Jen Steinman choir, but just backing vocals. So they have multiple vocal lines. It is. I think Andrew really did get tired of people calling him goth, and he went, "I'm going to do an actual rock record." And Vision Thing is the closest they did to an actual rock record.
Yeah, Vision
still
Thing
goth.
seems more polished to me too.
This seems
Had
pretty
more practice.
polished though to me though. I mean,
Well,
it
considering
seems
what it
fairly
is, yeah,
commercial
absolutely. Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
listen to it now. I do want to read something that Mark Coleman from Rolling Stone said at the time. He thought that Floodland was a step down from the Sisters of Mercy's previous material. He described it as Meatloaf joining The Cure for a remake of Lou Reed's Berlin, adding that the album is hilarious, sure, but always listenable at the very least. Not sure if that's a good review or not, but
You know what, though?
Well-
When you think about a typical Jim Steinman production, you think about the Barry Manilow that he produced, or you think about Meatloaf. I mean, there are elements of that in this Corrosion, but
Mhm.
it's kind of, I don't know if stripped down is the right word, but it's sleeker, it's sexier. There's something you can recognize it as Steinman, but it's also not the same as like who did he do? Didn't he do an Air Supply record or something?
Well,
It's
he
not like
did.
that. It's not that same kind of bombast.
Didn't he do a
He did
Celine
Bonnie
Dion?
Tyler.
He did Bonnie
Yeah.
Tyler.
Yeah. So here's the thing about Steinman's production on Floodland, though. So he does 3 songs.
Mhm.
Those songs are almost universally considered. I know deep fans are going to argue and say this isn't correct, but they're almost universally considered the best songs that Sisters of Mercy did. So you've got Dominion, Mother Russia, Lucretia, My Reflection, and this Corrosion.
Mhm.
They're atypical of Sisters of Mercy's output, and they were very successful. And Andrew Eldritch has really taken that personally. And again, screw Andrew Eldritch. I like his music, but he seems like an irritating human being because he's constant. I hate people who complain about their success. No one held a gun to his head and made him work with Jim Steinman. In
I
fact,
like
he did
his
it on
idea.
purpose. And
It was
then he's
his
angry
idea.
about the result.
Mhm.
But Steinman is kind of wrapped around those 3 songs. He didn't arrange them. He didn't write them. It's not like Bad Out of Hell where he's actually arranging the music, right? The music and the lyrics is all Andrew, and then Steinman brings in the choirs. But what do people remember about this Corrosion? They remember that choir that swells up
and
at
the
the beginning
orchestra,
of
and
the
it
song.
comes up and has its own life. It was astounding when we think about other goth dark rock stuff that was coming out at the time. There was nothing else in that arena that sounded like this.
I can tell you when I first listened to it, I really couldn't put my finger on it because it was quite different than, first it starts off with the drum machine and I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. And the drum machine's pretty hot in the mix on the whole record. But I have to admit the Jim Steinman songs on this album, for me, were probably the most refreshing tracks of the whole record.
The
I
song
thought-
More stands out on this record too, and that's the
Yeah.
Jim Steinman track.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
I
heard that
think
one
the
and I was like,
combination.
oh yeah, I remember this. I like this one.
I think the combination of Eldritch and Jim Steinman together I think it's like the perfect marriage. I mean, I like what they were able to produce.
And it's a
Yeah.
genius idea, because who else would think of that? Who else would think about
I,
asking Jim Steinman to produce something, and I want a choir on it and stuff like that? I mean, it's kind of a nutty idea, but look what came
it
out of it.
works so
Right.
much.
Yeah.
And like Sam says,
So-
that stuff just was like nothing else at the time, right? It was fresh.
There were some other bands that were, I mean, if you think back to like Pretty Hate Machine, that drum
Mhm.
machine, and Really Rich Raw, but there was
That's
something
later.
about the
That's what,
melodic
91?
stuff. Yeah, what Pretty Hate Machine was 83.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, 83?
83
You're
or
talking
84.
Nine Inch Nails? No, that's 91, 93, 92.
Hang on.
Hang on.
Uh-oh.
89.
Oh, sorry, I'm off by
Ah,
3 years.
shit, I was
Sorry.
off too.
88. Yeah, I was just about to say you're both wrong, but
All I remember is hearing
I wasn't
it like
sure until I pulled it out.
I just remember hearing it like in 91, 92.
Right.
For
And
me,
let's
I
not
put
forget,
like Nine Inch Nails, Typo Negative, Fields of Nephilim, Christian Death were all, but they were a lot heavier, darker than this particular set of songs on Floodland.
right. Say, let's not forget
Mhm.
1987. So MTV is still very much at the height of its power. And there's a fabulous video for this Corrosion where they're standing in what looks like this broken cathedral, right? And there's rain coming down. You're like, give me the rain. Standing there. And again, this guy just looks like a skeleton. He's so pale and so skinny and wearing black leather and all this water pouring down on him.
It's dark. Dark.
And I remember first seeing that video. And that's a very different experience than being in a dark club with 150,000 watts of sound system pumping bass into you. But it's still a very powerful experience, connecting the music and the image. And the video, now I have to look it up, but I think it was done also by the guy who did Bonnie Tyler's Holding Out for a Hero video. There's a Bonnie Tyler connection in there beyond just Jim Steinman. But it's such a bombastic video. And of course, the entire song was meant as a parody, which also Andrew Eldritch gets very salty about that. So what's my catchphrase tonight, kids? That's right. Screw Andrew Eldritch.
That's right.
No one made him write that song just because, I mean, people took it seriously because it was such an awesome song. If he had wanted to write a parody song, he shouldn't have made it so damn good.
But you know, talking with friends of mine, there are very few people, like I'm still friends. We were on alt goth on listservs online way back.
Alt goth. Remember lists? Oh my god, user groups. Oh my god.
So, but in talking to some of those people that I'm still friends with, there are a lot of people, unless they were real music fans, that didn't understand why he wrote this Corrosion and what it was about. Of course, systemically, a lot of people who were activists and stuff were talking about the corrosion of society, which wasn't too far from what he was trying to allude to. But there are a lot of folks that probably, even if they were big fans, probably didn't read why Eldritch did that and what it was supposed to be regarding his previous bandmates.
Right. And by the way, I was telling Todd in a previous conversation, there's a fantastic video on a YouTube channel called, hold on, very sorry.
It's all right.
Oh, while you're looking for that, the video for this Corrosion was directed by Stuart Oram. And he also did Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division and In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. So
okay.
think about
Well, I'll
that.
be
It makes a lot
darned.
of sense.
Okay, so it's this channel called New British Canon. They actually have a lot of very entertaining long form videos talking about bands and their history. And they have this video called The Smirking Revenge of the Sisters of Mercy and This Corrosion. And it's like 40 minutes long, and it goes through the whole history of Andrew's attempts to fight his previous band members, who also went on to be quite successful with his, his feeling that they were being successful by ripping him off. But maybe they just learned at Andrew Eldritch School. I don't know.
Maybe. Reed, I'm just curious though, how much had you heard Floodland prior to this? I mean, how familiar were you with this record? I'm just curious.
Very. So
Okay.
in the late 80s, this is another one of my, I know you won't think it to look at me, but I used to hang out with a lot of punks in the late 80s. And again, if you were punk in the late 80s, you know, punk music was not punk anymore. What you would have
Mhm.
thought of as punk in 1977 was long dead. So it was really hardcore, or I guess the British called it oi. But punks had transitioned to industrial music and goth, which is where you got this crossover with heavy metal fans like myself.
Mhm.
And it was punks that introduced me to the Sisters of Mercy. So I was very familiar with the Sisters of Mercy, but I had not listened to them in years until Warrell Dane put out his solo album Praises to the War Machine and covered Lucretia My Reflection. And frankly, I will take that over any song that the Sisters of Mercy ever did, including this Corrosion, which is my favorite Sisters of Mercy song. But it made me go, you know what? I used to love this music. I need to get all of this. And then I started playing it around the house, and my wife was like, "What is that?" And I said, "It's the Sisters of Mercy." And she's like, "I remember this from back in the day." So
Yeah.
the household became Sisters of Mercy fans again.
Well,
One of
Todd.
my longest
Oh,
time friends from online, her online moniker is Lucretia because of the song from way back.
Yeah.
well, Todd, do you remember much about this record from like in 87 and 88? How
I
much?
do. I mean, that was my 87 was my last year in college. And so
Mhm.
I worked at the campus radio station at the University of Georgia. And so I remember that. But my experience with Floodland is really pretty casual. I
Yeah.
mean, Sam likes it a lot. And if we ever have like a listening session where we're like sitting in front of the stereo and we're listening to music real loud, this Corrosion always makes it into the rotation. And so I've always had a really positive attitude about Sisters of Mercy, but I didn't until very recently. I didn't really listen to any of their albums all the way
Mhm.
through. And when I heard, it was really funny because when this started, of course, I was like, oh, I know Dominion Mother Russia, and I know Lucretia My Reflection, and I know this Corrosion. But when I started listening to it, at the very beginning of Dominion, I was thinking, oh my gosh, is that drum machine going to go throughout the whole thing? But you get used to it.
Well,
You get used to it really quick. And I've been the last couple of days, I've been listening to this for pleasure, not just in preparation for this video. And it really is something it's very simple, but the way his presentation of it is really powerful. It's different from a
mhm.
lot of other
Right.
programmed music that you hear.
We'll say, in my opinion, where you separate Sisters of Mercy fans from people who are never going to be Sisters of Mercy fans is how you deal with that drum machine. If you're a casual listener, much like a band like ZZ Top, and for the exact same reason, although, you know, sorry, Frank Beard, it's the rhythm section, right? People say, oh, all of the songs sound the same. Well, what they're really saying is it's got the same rhythm section in every song. It's got a programmed drum. There's no human element to it. And like all post-punk music, it leans heavily on repetition. So it's very repetitive. It's got that drum machine. And if you stop at that point, all of their songs are going to sound the same and you'll never be a fan until you get the Vision thing, which is frankly completely different. But if you get past that, there is a lot of personality to the music, and it's very interesting.
Well,
Yeah,
how do
it
you?
doesn't get old. It really doesn't. And you like it more and more the more you hear it.
I mean, when
And
I
it's
first heard it, though, that drum machine was a lot to take. I'm going, oh my God,
the
it
first
is
thing you
in your
notice. Yeah.
face. Well, do you feel that dates it? Do you feel that this record has aged well? Throwing it out to the group.
No, I think it's aged really well. I don't think it sounds dated at all.
I know Sam loves it. She's
But
probably, go ahead. What do you think?
I introduce this album to people every decade,
Okay.
and people can really love it for what it is because it
Mhm.
doesn't sound like anything else that's out right now in current music. And
Oh,
that
no.
deep rich
Mhm.
sound, but I've introduced people to it every decade since.
Reed, what do
I
you
think
think
it's
about the production?
I think it's hilarious. If you go online, nerds have done a very good job of explaining exactly what Dr. Avalanche was at every step along the way. You know, which machine it was.
Right.
Yeah.
This.
Well,
I'm like, oh, God bless you, internet nerds.
Hey, I have
But I
to.
mean,
He chose some good drum machines because I think that the electronic drum, the drum machine sounds great. It's
well,
just
you
really
know,
hot
you
in the
say that,
mix.
but it's actually many of them are some of the cheapest drum machines that were available at the time.
Mm.
So he was able to get pretty good results with some fairly crappy equipment. And then his main
Yeah.
worry was being able to keep it alive in concert
I
because, you know,
Yeah.
things were not super durable back in the day.
Yeah, I believe it's in a. I looked it up today. I believe it's in a Kai that he used for Floodland, and it's leaps and bounds ahead of the drum machine that he used for this, which is very different. So
Right. He was
So
using a
for
Casio at some point.
yeah, he was. Mhm.
You mean like off a Casio
There's a whole
keyboard?
timeline of which one was which
Yeah.
and when.
And now he just uses you know, drum samples on a computer, so he's gone high tech. But it's
Right.
probably the samples from his old songs because
is-
any, you know, a good high tech setup would make him sound to non Dr. Avalanche.
I
So
thought it was
is-
interesting that the song 1959 from Floodland has piano in it, and one of the things I was reading was that it has the sound of a piano, and it's because he didn't play it on the piano, he sampled the piano and then sequenced it. So
Right.
he's not really playing the piano.
See, that song drives me crazy
It's
because I
kind
wish
of,
it had real piano on it.
it's kind of like McGriddles at McDonald's have the taste of maple syrup.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too critical.
But it sounds
but
real. It doesn't matter because it sounds real. Does it bother you? Because it doesn't bother
It's
me. I thought it was
just-
real.
I didn't think it was real. I thought it was
Yeah.
playing on some kind of cheap keyboard.
It's
so talking about
I'd love to have had
Ele-
real piano that was real live. Yeah.
yeah, but you would when you watch them play, that wouldn't have fit with the scene. But
Okay.
another British artist, it was funny. He's going on tour that has nothing to do with Sisters of Mercy, but Lloyd Cole is another
Love
Brit
Lloyd.
rocker, and he is going on tour. And he put out a quip I saw in his video this week. He said, "I'm going on tour with my electronic band, much like Andrew Eldritch." And which is kind of a funny quip, which he's throwing way back to days for people that probably don't listen to Lloyd, you know, aren't new Lloyd now. But he mentioned his electronic band and Eldritch, which was funny for those of us who connected the dots. So
And for any Sisters of Mercy fans out there, I'm not trying to rag on the piano part. I'm coming in as someone who had with fresh ears and I've never heard it before. Not being a Sisters of Mercy fan or anything. I don't know. For some reason, that song just kind of, I just didn't quite get it.
I don't know.
But
Even
that's
even as someone who likes the album, the slower, more introspective songs are my least favorite things on it. I want the
Really?
bombast. I want the, you know. I guess I'm so far behind my electronic dance music genres, but I think trance, is there trance elements? It could be trap or house or who knows what all else. I'm sure that to somebody those are vastly different things. To me, it's all just in one big umbrella, right?
I think
the
it sounds a
second
bit
track,
like what
Flood.
became
Oh, go ahead.
EDM. I think it kind of
Yeah.
leads into what became EDM, that kind of
Okay.
trance,
Yeah, I
deep
think so too.
pulse beat rhythm that, you know, on repetition. I think you can watch that go through. So Reed, I think you're right. I think that, I don't know what the right term is, but I think I watched it go through EDM into that kind of stuff.
You know,
And I
in
think
the
Flood 2 sounds a lot like The Cure. I think they do a pretty good job of sounding like The
Well,
Cure on that track.
The Cure with Meatloaf. Yeah.
yes, they
There's
sound
There's no
like cured
meatloaf on that
meatloaf.
track.
I don't think that. I'm just joking. But there are elements of The Cure in there. That's what you described, Todd. I heard that as well.
Yeah.
But it's all of that. Everybody was influencing everybody else, you know. But I can imagine when Sam was in the clubs when this was out, to hear this being pumped through the DJ, it must have been, I mean, that's where you really need to listen to it, to
You
really
need to be able to feel it.
to feel it.
You need to be with the sound system enough to where you can feel it with that
Right.
beat that
Mhm.
resonates in your chest.
Mhm.
I remember we have a friend who was dancing with us at the time who's deaf, and they were like, I can feel this. I don't know
Mhm.
what it sounds like, but it feels really rich.
Mhm.
And so that's always stuck with me with our colleague now, they work with us now, but it's a long time ago, but it was really powerful for those
Mhm.
reasons, in a big place. Or I'm trying to imagine they're playing like at the Palladium this year on their tour in the summer. I'm trying to imagine how that's going to feel at the Hollywood. I'm not sure how that's going to feel or sound if they can push that much out there, but
I know they're doing this big 1-day festival out in Las Vegas, and I'm thinking he'll explode if sunlight hits him. So I'm not really sure how they're going to work that out.
Yeah, can he step out into the sun? I don't know.
Hey,
know.
Not without fatal consequences.
If I may, I want to correct myself from something I said earlier.
Yeah, go ahead.
The drum sounds were sampled together from various drum machines with an Akai S900 sampler. So
for this record, or
for this record, yes.
Okay.
So if you really did
great.
your Dr. Avalanche research, you could probably find out which drum machines he used. Oh, there they are.
There's a list.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Roland TR-606, TR-808, and TR-909. Yeah, those were common.
Yeah, there's no Lindrum on this. I'll give you that.
So
that would stick out if there was.
Are we gonna do a like a favorite tracks thing? Not that I'm not enjoying the general conversation, but
we're just rapping about it. Go ahead. We can do that. We want to wrap it up in an hour. You know, what is it? 6:45. We got 15 minutes. Go ahead. Just go around and talk about your favorite tracks and give a rating of the record. And
sure. Well, for my favorite tracks, I of course went with the Steinman tracks, Dominion, Mother Russia, and This Corrosion. And sitting here in 2023, it's impossible to describe to somebody who wasn't there just how transgressive a song about Mother Russia was in 1987 America. Now, Sisters of Mercy are British, so they didn't have quite the same stigma, although the British under Thatcher were number 2 on the anti-Russia hit list during the Cold War, and maybe again now. But having a song called Mother Russia come out in America, that was a massive slap in the face. And if you read his comments about the song, it is intended as this completely anti-American statement about how much Andrew Eldritch hated America and how much he hated their influence on Europe. So again, screw Andrew Eldritch. Andrew, wherever you are, screw you, buddy.
Yeah,
I don't care about your... but it's still a good song. And the lyrics are sparse enough that you can ignore all of that. Even if you read the lyrics, you can read it and go, oh, well, other than a couple of lines talking about mobile homes, what in the world? Plus, I'm just going to say in general, I've never understood the concept that somebody looked at the Soviet Union and thought, yeah, that is the place that holds the moral freaking high ground. No. Stalin murdered millions of people in order to establish the Soviet. Millions of people. No matter what you think the U.S. has done, our body count's a hell of a lot lower than that. Anyway, so Dominion, Mother Russia, great song. I can ignore the anti-American sentiment because you have to read interviews with him to actually get all of that stuff. And then This Corrosion is just, gosh, it's fantastic. I wish Meatloaf had covered it. That would have really put it over the top for me. But
we need more song. Meatloaf on here, I think. That would have been good. Well, Reed, what would you rate this record? Well, let's say we're rating it out of 10. What would you give it? Might be kind of hard to.
I actually give it about a 7. So Sisters of Mercy is what Martin Popoff calls a peaks and valleys band for me. They don't put out any albums that I think, man, every track on this album is killer. But their album, I love certain songs, and then some of them, especially the slower numbers, they don't really do it for me. Andrew Eldritch has the wrong voice for ballad type material.
Well, he's definitely very unique. I'll give him that.
He has a unique voice, and he sounds like he's singing inside of a tomb, which again, it's a good thing he's not goth rock or anything like that.
Right. Well, yeah. He sounds like he's singing inside of a tomb. Well, that's a good analogy. So give it a 7, a solid 7. I should have my
7.
Todd Evans. What would you, after listening to this and, revisiting this record after not really visiting this record at all, What's your
Well,
thoughts on it and any certain tracks and what's your rating of it? What would you think?
I agree with the peaks and valleys reference, but I also would choose 1, 3, and 5, Dominion, Mother Russia, Lucretia,
Mhm.
My Reflection, and Miss Corrosion as my favorite tracks. But I also like Flood 1,
Mhm.
which is the second track, which is the one I thought sounded like a couple albums in The Cure. And I like 1959, even though it's not a real piano. But
Yeah, I don't.
I
That one I don't.
one thing I wanted to share though, and I was looking for it in my notes and I finally found it. The reason that the original reason that Eldritch was contacted Jim Steinman is because the ABBA song "Gimme Gimme Gimme" was part of their set list, and Steinman
Really?
was interested in producing a cover version, but he was too busy. So Eldridge went to him later and said, "Do you want to collaborate?" But I think that's really
I
interesting
think it was a
because I
great
don't think it gets much more
collaboration.
mainstream than that. So obviously, Eldridge is not a super. He's not a super stuffy guy. I mean, he called this album "Vision Thing," which is a reference to something that George W. Bush said. So, which I always thought was interesting. But I do think that there are a couple of tracks on Floodland that bring it down a little bit, but I don't want to mention them by name, but they're okay. But I would give this album an 8.5, and
8.5. All right.
higher if it had more than 3 songs that were of that ilk. But I don't think I don't think I don't think there ever was going to be that many songs that are like those 3.
All right. Sam, you're probably going to give it a 10 out of 10, but I don't know.
No,
Tell
but
me, give us your review and your rating.
so in my opinion, a lot of the songs that came out of the post-punk that were in the goth dark rock arena, at best you might get 3 or 4 songs that were good out of most of those albums.
Mhm.
There were not a lot of them that you wanted to listen to all the way through. I mean, I remember buying albums and being like, oh, I can't wait to listen. I'm like, oh, well, at least there's 1 song or 2 songs there. So, but when we were listening, we weren't listening to albums all the way through unless you're having a listening party with your friends. You were hearing it in clubs, you were hearing 1 song on the radio, you're getting what was being promoted. So so for Floodland, I would go somewhere between a 7.5 and or 8,
Mhm.
just because some of it is so good that I think those will carry other things. So 1959, the piano doesn't bother me. I like the kind of empty, hollow
Mhm.
sounds to it that kind of, but that's also tied to nostalgia from way back. So,
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
Lucretia, My Reflection, and Dominion, and This Corrosion, and then probably Flood 1, somewhere in there. So it's lovely music if you want to consider when it was produced, and
Mhm.
the sheer moxie of writing a song at that time frame about Mother Russia. It was just tongue in cheek, but unless you studied lyrics, and a lot of people don't pay attention to lyrics or why things are
Mhm.
written. So I'd say it's a really strong album, and that's why I keep introducing people to it 40 years later.
So you would get, what are you going to give it?
I don't know. I'd somewhere between 7.5 and 8.
Oh, we'll
It's
go
not
with
like
8 then.
there's not going to be, there are other albums that might be better, but this is it's a really powerful album. And if you want to dance, you can crank your music up and dance, and you don't have to have any good dance steps because the rhythm will just it'll just take you over. So
Well, I did read that Mark Coleman's review on it, and it was, I think this album has aged better based on what I've seen. Like All Music almost gave it 5 stars. And I've looked around, there's other reviews on this record, and I think people look back on this, and I think they might have judged it a bit harsh at the time, and I think it's aged well. The drum machine for me it was a bit overpowering, but like what Todd says, after you kind of sit down with it and you kind of adjust to it, it's okay, and you just kind of let it happen. And it's just that initial shock when I heard it. I went, oh boy, here we go. And I thought, oh, can I handle this? But I think it was fine. I've listened to it like 4 or 5 times. And for me, it almost seems like one of those albums that you almost have to listen to as a whole album. I don't know why, but I think the sum is greater. You listen to it as a piece of, as I can't even talk today, as a conceptual work to some degree. And I think it works better. I was just listening to the whole thing in just one shot, and I get to the end of it and I feel like I went through something, would it be like one of those go-to records for me? Well, if I was going to do a dance club or I would get ready to go out, maybe I'd play it. But I think it stands up. I love the vocals. I like the production, and I love what Jim Steinman brings to the table. I think that's the perfect combination. And the choirs, I think it's beautiful. I think it really works well. So I think I could give this, I'm probably going to be with Todd on this. I think I'm going to give it a 7.
I gave it an 8. Didn't I give it an 8.5?
No.
I think you'll be with Reed.
I mean, Reed.
Yeah.
I'm going with a Reed. Sorry. Yeah, I don't have my glasses on. I'm going with what Reed said. I'm going with Reed. I think a 7's fair. I don't know how often I'd return to this, but I enjoyed it. I don't know. If I was going to listen to other goth bands, I think I'm much more of a Cure guy than this. The Cure to me is probably more accessible, and like Disintegration is very dark. I mean, that's my kind of thing. This is you might want to, God, I don't even know how to even, this album's just so different. I really don't even know how to even describe my thoughts about it.
Well, I think, Sam is exactly on the nose about one thing. You cannot differentiate this style of Gothic music from the dance clubs that were springing up at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing about a trancey, repetitive song, is they can take these songs that were 5 or 6 minutes long and make 11-12-minute dance singles out of them.
Well, yeah.
By changing very little.
And they don't sound gimmicky. They're not like the Reflex by Duran Duran. They don't have like a bunch of crazy sounds in them to make them longer. They can just be longer.
Right. So, but part of that is you sacrifice the structure, the complexity of something like The Cure, where they have an 11-minute, 12-minute song, and it's a very dense 11 or 12 minutes, but you're also not expected to dance to it. You're more tripping out to it, right?
Right.
Don't do drugs, kids. But if you're at a club, you want that repetition. You want just that driving beat. So really, tools for very different tasks.
Good point. It's almost an extension of disco. Dark.
Yeah.
It's goth disco is what it is. What?
So you can't leave out Patricia Morrison if you're talking about Floodland.
Okay.
She was, number one, amazing bassist, but she was the look and feel of the goth pinup girl. That was a whole lot of the selling factor for the video work, I think,
You can barely see her in there, but
I don't even think she plays on that
you
record,
can even
though,
tell
does she?
Not a note.
Not a note.
But
she's in the video though, and
she's in the video, and she did work with Eldritch on things, but she is associated very much with Floodland as the album, because she also was with the Damned. And so, she was part of the goth music scene too. So along with other stuff and Creeper and some other stuff, but she was part of the touring magic and the visibility of that. So you had the guy who looked like a cross between maybe somewhere between Rick Ocasek and something else, but more gothed up from Eldritch, and then her, and it was a beautiful package. And that marketing is what people saw. Whether or not she played or not, I don't think anybody cared.
No, they were just looking at her. They really didn't.
I think
care what she was
Eldritch
doing.
actually credits her as inspirational.
Lucretia's written about her. Lucretia's supposed to be written about her. So,
yeah, because she was the dark reflection of Andrew Eldritch. Which, imagine that. But he was like, her job was to be there and inspire me.
Yes.
It's like the ABC album where they have those two fake band members in the video
Right.
that aren't on the record, but they're
They're
there.
important to the image.
They're
I wanted to
important to
say
the
something.
image.
I wanted to say something real quick about the choir. You know, when you hear about how the choir was integrated into this corrosion by Eldritch and Jim Steinman. Whenever I hear a choir on like a Swedish or a band from Finland, like a metal album, like I'm always going on and on about Amorphous, but they have these little moments in their music where there's a choir and you know that it came from here, that they were, it's very obvious that they were inspired by that. Same with bands like Nightwish. I mean, you hear that and you go, oh, that started here.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that, Todd, because there's one band that I was totally reminded of when I heard this album. And I don't know if they've ever mentioned it. I know they've mentioned ABBA as an influence, but Ghost, I could hear elements of Ghost from this band. I think
that's
they,
one of the pieces of the Ghost puzzle.
There
are many pieces.
Well, yeah, Ghost is just a conglomeration of all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But I could hear Sisters of Mercy in there a lot of it. But I don't know. Well, that just goes to show you how influential they were, you know? I don't know. Maybe they're more of a musician's band, you know? I don't know. What do you think, Sam? A lot of musicians like Sisters of Mercy?
I don't know. I don't think, well, I think Eldritch tried to stay away from it. And I think the bands that were in the real post-punk, the darker goth stuff that was not trying to market itself to mainstream wouldn't say they were fans of it. But you can't go through that late 80s era without talking about the impact of that particular album. If you were alive, functioning, college radio and in clubs. And then even into the 90s, I think as that became more common, it was kind of a staple.
I mean, I don't know. I'm going out on a limb here, but would you not have 9 Inch Nails would you have had 9 Inch Nails if Sisters of Mercy hadn't existed?
Yes. I don't think
you would have.
Yeah. I don't think Trent Reznor would have done anything different than when he produced and wrote and created.
It just so happened they just kind of.
He might have seen it as an opportunity. He might have heard it and said, hey, I can make this work, if he could make it work.
If they can do that and I can put more actual real musicians and more production value into it other than Steinman, I could grind some stuff out that's a little bit more raw. And
I suspect Al Jorgensen is a much bigger influence than Andrew.
Yeah, because the first Ministry album came out, 83, 84? Help me. Todd probably knows.
No, I actually don't.
Sam, you know.
I think it's a little bit earlier than that, but that's
I want to say it's earlier. I want to say because it's before high school for me, so I think it's a little earlier.
I mean, that might even be maybe it really started there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
No, I mean, for goth, definitely. I mean, post-punk is really where you draw the line.
Yeah.
A lot of people draw it directly to Bauhaus, and Bela Lugosi's "Dead" is like the first overtly goth song. But again, I'm gonna hold on because I'm contrarian. I'm gonna hold on to Black Sabbath as the original goth band because that thought is mine. There are many like it, but this one is mine.
The first Ministry album came out in 83. And then Twitch 86, The Land of Rape and Honey was 88. And I do remember that record. That was huge.
Yeah.
At least like on the OSU campus. That was huge. That seemed to be more of what people were listening to as opposed to Sisters of Mercy. That's just what I remember. But yeah, Ministry was big. But they're all in that same kind of vein to some degree, Well, I rated everything. Our average was 7.6. So
realistic.
Yeah, that's realistic. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a great record. I mean, I wouldn't want to listen to it all the time, but it was a great listen. I'll give it that.
I would love to see the vinyl copy from 90.5 FM in Athens of Floodland, and it's probably destroyed because I knew we played it a lot.
So my radio show at Wake Forest, we we started, my friend Megan and I had a show on Saturday night. And so we would start with silly music with Come On Eileen, and we closed with This Corrosion every Saturday night. And we went through several pressings because it was on high rotation.
Just wore it right out.
Well, us and everybody else, it was.
I don't remember seeing back in the day, you know, going through the bins. Of course, I haven't really looked lately, but I don't recall seeing any Sisters of Mercy hardly ever. You know,
I think it
was
went out
out
to
there.
college radio
It's out
stations
there,
and
but-
DAT tapes and you know, it was an import. It wasn't you know, it wasn't coming out of American record labels that I could find in Atlanta at the time.
Yeah.
And that is right towards, you know, vinyl was shutting down, not gone yet, but definitely
Well, 91 was the
decreased
end.
market share.
91's when they shut things down. I mean, they were still kind of pressing stuff, but that's when the major record labels, they were done, 91. But all right, kids. Well, we gave it a 7.6, so that's not bad. I guess we can wrap it up. I guess we could recommend this to anyone who'd be interested in any type of Gothic industrial type of music. If you haven't heard it, I mean, it was a refreshing listen to me because I hadn't really heard it, and you know, I don't know. I'd like to hear it some more. I'll tell you this. I'm much more interested to hear some of their other stuff, like the first album, because it's more guitar oriented. I don't know. I'm probably going to get they make like this, you know, the original album classic series where you can get all those like 5 CDs in a set. They do have one for Ministry that's got the 3 albums.
I don't know that I would say First and Last and Always is necessarily more guitar oriented. You're still talking about a band that's primarily basing their songs around bass and drums. We'll say it's more varied than Floodland. Floodland has more of a unified style to it. But if anything, I would compare First and Last and Always to Susie and the Banshees.
Yes.
Love Susie and the Banshees.
So maybe it is the album for you.
My experience with becoming familiar with the 3 albums is that I liked all 3 of them instantly, and all 3 of them are different from each other. So I think if you like one, you'll like the others, but they're not the same.
Well, I can tell I'm going to spend more money. All right, cool. We wind this up. I want to thank Sam Evans for coming on the show. Thank you very much for showing up. It's been fun talking Sisters of Mercy. And of course, Reed Little and Todd Evans.
Thanks for having me.
It's been good. This was great.
Thanks, Grant.
So, all right. Please like, subscribe, make a comment. Do you like Sisters of Mercy? Do you not like Sisters of Mercy? Do you like Floodland? Please leave a comment, like, subscribe, ring the bell. You know what to do. Good night, and hopefully we can do this again.
All right. Night.
Night.